أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله الذي قصرت عن رؤيته أبصار الناظرين وعجزت عن نعته أوهام الواصفين الحمد لله رب العالمين الصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين خاتم النبيين أبي القاسم محمد وأهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا. أما بعد فقد قال الله تبارك وتعالى وقوله الحق وهو أصدق القائلين بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن ربكم الذي خلق السماوات والأرض في 6 أيام ثم استوى على العرش يغشى الليل النهار يطلبه حثيثا والشمس والقمر والنجوم مسخرات بأمره ألا له الخلق والأمر تبارك الله رب العالمين صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوات بيجي محمد وان. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Tonight is the second majlis in this series of majalis that we started last night. Yesterday, we began with the tamheed, where we opened up the discussion under the verse from Surah Tawbah, where we talked about briefly regarding the 12 months and the stipulation by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala regarding the 4 amongst them to be sacred months, and the reasoning behind it, and as to why those 4 are sacred, that even in the time of Jahiliyyat, the kuffar would pay extra attention not to commit an act which was forbidden, especially in those months. Primarily, qital, battle, war was supposed to come to a halt in these months. While the stipulation is that one should not show any sort of aggression at any time, but because it was very difficult for them to refrain from that, they were at least abiding with these 4 months, that they would not go ahead and show aggression toward others and cause any sort of mischief, especially when these 4 months would arrive. Kind of like, if I can drive a similarity, how we behave during the Ayyam Azah, right? We agree to the fact that how in these 12 days, these 10 days, or in the month of Ramadan, how our behaviors change slightly out of respect of these ayyam. Things that we would normally do, we would refrain from doing so, especially in these 10 days, in these 10 nights. And of course, depends from the culture that you come from. There might be more limitations that your parents have put upon you, especially in these 10 first nights. I remember a story a few years ago that I had related, or maybe longer, that I was speaking in Idara Jafriya in Maryland, and before my speech, a child came up to me and he asked me a question. He said, Maulana, why can't we play or use our Xbox during these 10 nights? Well, of course, a child asking a question, in his own way. that why can't we play video games or use Xbox or whatever it is that they have these different devices. So I said, what did your parents tell you? Well, they just told me it's not allowed. And that's it, you can't do it. Of course, this was a mentality that we were brought up with, that our parents would tell us something and it would be patthar pe lakir and the rest is history. You dare go against what they had said, even if they provided you with reasoning or not. But of course, times have changed. Children ask these questions, and there's nothing wrong in providing them with proper answer so that they understand it. Of course, I was getting ready to get up on the minbar, so the first thing that came to my mind is what I told him. And of course, it was a probably 11-year-old kid, so I didn't want to make it too dramatic either. I said, imagine if someone died in your family. I didn't say, for example, your father or your mother. But I said, imagine someone passed away in your family. He said, yes. He said, how would you feel? He said, I'd be sad. I said, would you be playing video games the next day? He said, no, that would be the last thing on my mind. An 11-year-old was responding like this. Video games would be the last thing on my mind, especially if that was a person, because kids have seen and they have gone through losing their grandparents, so they have seen this phenomena, that they were with their grandparents for quite some time, and then this personality is no longer with them. And so he understood. I said, would you go back to playing it the next day or the very next day or the following day? He said, no, I won't even think about it. I would be in such a state of sadness and grief and mourning that would be the last thing on my mind. I said, well, if that is the case when it comes to your family members leaving this world and dying and passing away, just imagine the respect that we have for Sayyid al-Shuhada, to whom we own everything. We owe everything to him. Our wujud, our existence, our madhab, our relations, everything we owe to him. That is the respect that at least our parents have inculcated in us as far as the love of Ahlul Bayt is concerned. No doubt about the love of Ahlul Bayt that our kids have. And so when they leave this world, or one of them, it is the date of their shahadat, especially when it comes to the shahadat of Sayyid al-Shuhada. How should you be? He said, I understand what you're saying. And of course, this was a way of getting through to a child of that age. So similarly, I was referring to the 4 months, that of course it would be very difficult for these Arabs to stay away from, all the things that they did throughout the year. But they were very mindful of these 4 months. They would refrain from doing anything, even if they did not believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala the same way. Just imagine, what would it take for someone to take a life of the grandson of Rasulullah in these months? The months that even kuffar are paying attention to. يُعَظِّمُونَهُ, the riwayah says. They would keep it sacred and they would refrain from all those things which were haram in it. But the so-called Muslims standing up against Nawase Rasul, grandson of Rasulullah, shedding his blood in these very sacred months. So hence, we realize that it is difficult to sometimes fathom the words of history. But with this shahadat, what happened? That 14 centuries have passed, yet we still find, corona or not, that people come out with the same vigor, with the same love, with the same enthusiasm, if not more, every single year when it comes to the shahadat of Sayyid al-Shuhada and Muharram al-Haram. And there's a reason behind it. The riwayat, which is associated with the noble prophet Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam, in which he said, Inna liqatl al-Husayn hararatan fi qulub al-mu'minin la tabrudu abada. That with the shahadat of Hussein, there's this hararat, there's this energy, there's this light that has been illuminated in the hearts of mu'mineen, la tabrudu abadan, which will never be extinguished, which will never get cold. as long as ayyam are there. So we understand the value of these majalis aza. This is an ibadat. You've heard it a great deal. I remember coming to this very Imam Barga for the past so many years. Reciters such as Marhum, Allama Zishan Hada Jawadi, Alallahu Maqamuhu, used to sit on this mimbar when it used to be in the other hall, obviously. And remember listening to him, sitting like you guys are sitting and benefiting. And remember these very words from those such scholars that consider this to be ibadat. Do not consider it to be anything less than an ibadat. Because when you come here with the khulus, with sincerity, not only that you genuinely learn something, but you also, at the same time, are doing the ibadat as well. It does not take anything away. While you're, inshallah, benefiting something from it, learning something, educating yourself, but the thawab is also associated with it because it is being performed as a ibadat. And then even if someone does not understand a word of what the speaker is saying, for example, many of our elderly women who do not speak English, for example, they come here, or even the young kids who probably do not understand, the marsiya, the noha, the speech of Maulana. They don't understand any of this because they're too young to fathom and understand and comprehend. But the fact that they spend a couple of hours away from everything else and in this Imam Barga or in the masjid, they are also part of performing this ibadat. And the sawab, of course, goes to the parents when they are that young. So consider this institution as the greatest gift from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to you. Yes, we had to go through this shahadat of Imam Hussain to be benefiting from it. But now that shahadat has taken place, this Majlis Azad, this institution has been, established for us. What is it that is our duty when it comes to this Majlis Azad? You find three groups of people that are part of this Majlis. First group of people are the Bani Majlis. Bani Majlis, the organizers of the Majlis, the founders of this idara, or the founders of the Majlis Azah here in this center or in this neighborhood, or the organizers. They're indeed important people because in their hands is what? The ability to take their community in whichever direction they want to. You can hold programs which will uplift your community spiritually, or you can go ahead and hold programs which will do nothing for them. So you have that very key role. Whoever is part of that Bani should not undermine their duty and their position. They're at a very critical position to be able to produce and give what the community is in need of, especially in the day and age that we live in. Second, I can't speak too much because that's not my topic and I have to come back to the ayat that I recited. Second is Zakir Majlis. So you have Bani Majlis, then you have Zakir Majlis. Zakir Majlis, the one who sits on the member, the one who speaks, the one who is given the authority vested by, of course, people, as well as Hawzat al-Ilmiya, learn something, having attained the knowledge to come and sit on the member, fulfill the duty and the taqaddus of the member, protect it, defend it, and at the same time, go ahead and deliver a message which will be beneficial. So it's a very difficult duty of the Zakir Majlis as well. And then third is Sami'een Majlis or Sami' Majlis. So you have Bani, you have Zakir, and you have Sami'. Sami' is the audience. As I mentioned, the reference that I gave that few years ago, I used to sit down there as well, listening. I was amongst the Sami'een, and even now we are sometimes Sami'een when someone else is speaking. But as a Sami' Majlis, it is also your duty that you come to the Majlis Azah, There's one thing which is common between the three groups, Bani, Dhakir, and Same. And I'll conclude with this. Three groups, one thing is common between all three. And that common ground between the three is ikhlas. If Bani Majlis is doing this Majlis with khulus, this is going to be accepted in the bargah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I remember a story that there's a person who who held a Majlis in his house, and a lot of people showed up. So someone said, MashaAllah, many people came to your Majlis Aza. He said, when you do Majlis with khulus, it doesn't matter how many people show up or how few. The next day, his Majlis was contradicting with another Majlis, conflicting with another Majlis that was happening in the neighborhood. So half the crowd went there, and of course, not as many people showed up the next day. The same person said to him, what happened today? Not many people have come. He said, when you do Majlis for khulus, you don't really worry about how many or how few people show up. So it doesn't really matter as long as the khulus is shamil hal. Same thing goes with Zakir. If I come here for the purpose to gain some sort of madh and praise from the people, and to come here so that, people say, MashaAllah, this and that, to my face, even if they don't, understand what I'm saying or they don't really care for what I'm saying, and I get this, false praise, then of course, this is not doing through the khulus that I should be observing. And then third is the Sami'een Majlis as well. Their duty with all the things that are considered is also to be what? With khulus when they come to Majlis Aza. They should come to Majlis Aza not for particularly who's speaking and who's not speaking, because then you'll be coming here for Dhakir Hussain and not Dhikr Hussain. Salawat Beji Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. Remember the history of this Majlis. The first Majlis was established by fourth Imam, Imam Zainul Abidin alayhi salatu wassalam, in the city Balad al-Sham, right? When Asiran, they were being released. And upon the release, they wanted to hold a Majlis Aza. Bibi Zainab and Imam Zainul Abidin are first to go ahead and establish this Majlis Aza. They're the founders of this Majlis Aza. Those who sat and gathered, especially when the heads of Shuhada were brought in. That was the first proper Majlis that took place. And then we saw the sequence continued. In the time of, for example, our fifth Imam, there were poets such as Kumayt who would ascend on the mimbar. Imam would ask these people to sit up. So those who recite the poetry in praise of Ahlul Bayt understand your maqam. That if Imam was present, Imam would tell you to sit up on the mimbar, because you are reciting the poetry in praise of their jad. And when Kumayt recited poetry, and when he spoke about the masaib of Sayyid al-Shuhada, Imam said, stop. Because he couldn't bear to hear the heart-wrenching masaib that Kumayt was reciting. And then Imam made a dua, Allahumma khfir li Kumayt. Oh Allah, forgive Kumayt. Made dua right away, because Kumayt was also Dhakir Majlis. You come to the time of, for example, 8th Imam, Imam Ali ibn Musa Rida alayhi salatu wasalam. You find another great poet by the name Di'b al-Khuza'i. He also defended Ahlul Bayt on numerous occasions and recited the fadail and the masaib of Ahlul Bayt. But of course, this is where Majlis Aza was established. From fourth Imam's time, it continued. But then came the tribe of Dailami, who openly conducted Majalis Aza in the way that we do it. And of course, in the subcontinent, it was given a different flavor, where you had the Marsiyagoi, you had the Salam, you had Majlis in the format where speech would be given, and the conclusion with the Noha and Latmiya. This was, of course, more so in the subcontinent, how it developed. So we owe a great deal to those forefathers of ours who did this favor to us, that we have this Majlis Aza in this form, in this format that we still have. And we are keeping up with that tradition. That tradition should not change regardless of where you are, where you go. And this should be inculcated into the next generations to come as well. But the history of Girya on Hussein is not something which is recent. Majlis might be recent from the time of fourth Imam. I say recent because time of fourth Imam is only 14 centuries ago. Girya bar Hussein is something which is timeless. Because the first person who wept in this world upon Imam Hussein is Hazrat Adam alayhi salatu. When he was taught those names, as the ayat of Surah Baqarah talk about, وَعَلَّمَ آدَمَ الْأَسْمَاءَ كُلَّهَا. When all the names were taught to Hazrat Adam, and the riwayat mention it was the names of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salatu wasalam, through which Hazrat Adam made that tawbah for that tark awla that he had performed. When the name of Imam Hussein was mentioned, Hazrat Adam wept, and there was tear in his eye. He said, why this spontaneous reaction on its own that I'm weeping and I'm crying? And he was informed that amongst your dhurriyat, there will come a prophet in his generation, in his progeny, his grandson will be martyred in this way. And that is the reason this tear has come to your eye. And then we find riwayat in regards to other anbiya as well, Hazrat Nuh, Hazrat Ibrahim. Whoever went through that Karbala, that city, that place, they stumbled, some stumbled over, and different reactions happened through which they understood there was something that was there. But of course, this is all prior to the shahadat of Sayyid al-Shuhada. So today our question is raised a lot of time as to why do you commemorate the Gham for 2.5 months? Ma'asumeen, if you go into the riwayat of Ma'asumeen, for example, I gave you the example of 4th Imam or 5th Imam and 8th Imam, where the Majlis al-Aza was really established. They had these gatherings only on the day of Ashur. That is what the riwayat mentioned. That from the first day of Muharram, you would not see smile on the faces of Imams. And on the 10th day, they would have this Majlis al-Aza, for example, in honor of Sayyid al-Shuhada. So why don't you follow the sunnat of your Imams and only keep it to 10 days? Why extend it to 2.5 months? And if that answer is given, then they have another question to follow up with it. I'm saying these things not necessarily for adults. They have ways of responding to all of these ishkalat, but especially the youngsters who might be posed with these and they may not be able to respond. Well, 2.5 months is still not enough. If it was the entire year, it would still not be enough. Why? I'll give you an example. From the sunnat of Rasulullah, the two greatest supporters of Rasulullah, one Hazrat Abu Talib alayhi wasalam, second Bibi Khadija salamullahi alayha. Both of them died in the same year. Rasulullah did not declare, when big personalities pass away, different countries, they go ahead and declare Yom Sog for 1 day, for 3 days. Rasulullah could have done it the same way, 1 day or 3 days for a week. Rasulullah said, no, the entire year will be considered for grieving. Amul Huzn was the name given to the entire year upon passing of Hazrat Khadija and Hazrat Abu Talib, both of whom died naturally. They weren't martyrs in a sense that they were in a battlefield and they attained a shahadat. And it wasn't that their shahadat is something which safeguarded the religion from annihilation. Now, they provided a great deal of support. Hazrat Khadija through her wealth and Hazrat Abu Talib through his moral support to Rasulullah. But their shahadat, their wafat, was not something that through which Islam will perish. Keeping that in mind, they did not attain shahadat in the battlefield, but here come to Imam Hussein, who's given this ultimate sacrifice in the battlefield to irrigate the religion from going into annihilation. And you don't want us to weep for him for 10 days? You want to limit this weeping for 1 day? 2.5 months. If you follow the sunnat of Rasulullah, Amul Huzn, the entire year should be as far as the grief of Imam Hussein is concerned. Salawat biji Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. And then they would say, well, if you weep, إِنَّ الْمَيَّةَ لَيُعَذِّبُ بِبُقَاءِ أَهْلِهِ عَلَيْهِ. The second ishkal would be, okay, fine. You want to commemorate for that long? Fine. But make sure you know this hadith as well, that the weeping upon a mayyat by their family members sends azab on them. إِنَّ الْمَيَّةَ لَيُعَذِّبُ بِبُكَاءِ أَهْلِهِ عَلَيْهِ. This riwayat is there in their sahih. That when a person cries for their deceased, ala ahlihi. Make sure that you pay attention to the word ahl. When a person cries for their ahl, their family members, it is given azab. Now, of course, this is something which is fabricated from numerous ends. First of all, it contradicts the ayat of Quran. Ayat of Quran says, وَلَا تَزِرُ وَازِرَةٌ وِزْرَ أُخْرَى. Do not lay the blame of one person onto other. If I have done something wrong, how is it going to go ahead and give you azab? If I'm weeping, how is it going to go ahead and give azab to the person who has left this world? This is against the conscious as well as the ayat of Quran. Secondly, let's have a mafruda and hypothesis that yes, this hadith is correct and it is associated with Rasulullah. Then we are the ahl, we are weeping for them. Why is it that matters to you? Because you're not the ahl of them, you're not crying for them. Let us weep for them because we are the family members. It is the ahl who weeps for them. Is that what you're saying? And thirdly, when they say that you have created this phenomena of weeping, we say that is also wrong. This is the sunnah from Rasulullah. If you blame someone for bid'at, it shouldn't be us. Because we're weeping as a natural cause after someone's wafat or shahadat. Rasulullah wept for Imam Hussein before the shahadat. It makes sense to weep and cry for someone after they have left. It's a natural thing. But for someone to cry and weep before their shahadat, yes, this is where you might raise points and raise eyebrows and might contradict and might question them. But you find in your own books that 50 years prior to the shahadat of Imam Hussein, two books, Majma' al-Zawaid and Hakim-e-Naishapuri's Al-Mustadrak, both mention this riwayah where Rasulullah was playing with his grandson Imam Hussein, and then all of a sudden he started crying. When he wept, all the women in the house, they came to Rasulullah and they said, may our lives be sacrificed for you. Why is it that you weep? Usually when a child cries in a family, you don't really worry about it. Maybe they have done something or they've hurt themselves. But when an elderly is weeping and crying, you get worried. Why is it an older person is crying? So they came to Rasulullah, may our lives be ransomed, O Prophet. What made you weep and cry? Rasulullah said, I was playing with my grandson Hussein. And Jibreel came and gave me the news that, O Rasul, your grandson will be martyred in the plains of Karbala. And he showed me the plains of Karbala. And this is what making me cry. As soon as the wives of Rasulullah, the daughter of Rasulullah, they heard this kalam, they started weeping and crying as well. Rasulullah wiped off his tears. He went outside. When you have wept, people can see by looking at your face complexion that you might have wept a while ago. The ashab of Rasulullah asked the same question. They said, O Rasulullah, may our lives be ransom over you. What is it? It seems like that you were crying. Rasulullah narrated the same thing that he did to his wives. They also started weeping and crying as well. So if anyone had created the concept of weeping for Imam Hussein, the first one was Rasulullah. The audience were the wives of Rasulullah, the Ummuhat Mu'mineen. And thirdly, it was the Ashab of Rasulullah, the Jalilul Qadr Ashab. When all of them have wept 50 years prior to the wafat and the shahadat of Imam Hussein, then you should not contradict anyone who weeps after the shahadat of Imam Hussein. Salawat bheji Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So indeed, these majalis-e-aza are a great opportunity for us to be able to derive various benefits from it. You know, riwayat mention as far as the thawab, even if there was no thawab associated with it, we would still be coming to these majalis. But then there are thawab that are associated with it. How many times have you heard this riwayat? Man baka wa abka wa tabaki wajaba lahu jannah. The one who weeps, makes others cry, and makes a face as if they are crying. For Imam Hussein, wajabat lahul jannah. Jannat becomes wajib upon that individual. This is the Lord of yours, man sabaqat rahmatuhu ghadaba, whose rahmat exceeds his ghazab. You would say, where's the ghazab of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? He is giving jannat merely for weeping for Imam Hussein. What could be the ghazab of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when the rahmat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is so wasi'? When rahmat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is so wide. You know, Imam Zainul Abidin alayhi salatu wasalam was performing the tawaf of Kaaba, and one of the companions or the people who were there, Hasan al-Basri, he said, when he was looking at the tawaf that was being done. And of course, those of you who have performed the tawaf, especially at the time of Hajj, it's difficult. You know, it's not that easy. If you want to go ahead and do the tawaf, go for Umrah. It'll be much easier for you. But if you want to do it at the time of Hajj, the same 7 rounds takes you over an hour, sometime in 2 hours. It's not that long. The same thing could take you 5 minutes in normal circumstances, but at the time of Hajj, it might take you an hour and a half. And that too squeezed between hundreds and thousands of people. So when Hasan al-Basri saw this, he said, looking at it, al-ajabu kullul ajab. I'm surprised that mimman naja kayfa naja, that if anyone achieves success or salvation, how? This religion is so difficult. The acts of ibadat are so difficult. Look at this Hajj, how people are performing it. And this is one example of it. How could someone succeed with that's what's happening right here? Imam heard him, and then Imam responded. He said, Laysa al-ajab mimman naja kayfa naja. It's not surprising to see if someone is successful as to how they were successful. What's surprising is mimman halaka kayfa halaka. The one who perished, the one who did not become successful. That is more surprising. Ma'a sa'ati rahmati rabbik. With the widespread rahmat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, how is it even possible for one to not find salvation and success? That's how this deen and this mazhab is. Man sabaqat rahmatuhu ghadaba. The one whose rahmat exceeds his ghazab. Where is the ghazab of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? You come to Majlis Aza, one tear that comes down from your eyes, with sincerity, with khulus, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, wajabat lahul jannah. Jannat becomes obligatory upon such an individual. When you come to this majlis, you find the discussions regarding usul and furu. You find discussions regarding tariq and fiqh. You find your aqaid. If there was anything, someone was tampering with it, you find those aqaid to be also straightened out. This is where you come, you hear the fadail of ma'asumeen, and you hear the razail of the mukhalifeen. When you hear the fadail, it should be for the sake that we also adopt the same fadail in us. Just hearing the fadail of Ahlul Bayt, that they were at a certain place and they were able to do a certain thing, is not merely enough if we cannot go ahead and inculcate and implement those fadail in our zat as well. If we are the followers of Maktab Tashayyu and the followers of Ahlul Bayt. So you hear the fadail of Ahlul Bayt and you hear the razail of mukhalifeen. When you hear the story of mazlumeen, you develop this love and sympathy towards them. When you hear the stories of zalimeen, you develop this animosity towards them. Therefore, I said this yesterday as well. We've been hearing this tazkirah for so long, but I think we've been only hearing it through our ears and not letting it go through our hearts. Let the tazkirah travel from your ears to your heart. Let it affect your heart. Why? Because unless it affects your heart, you will not be able to properly understand the mazlumiyat of Sayyid al-Shuhada. And when you don't understand the mazlumiyat of Sayyid al-Shuhada, you won't understand the mazlumiyat of the mazlum of today. Because that's what the lesson of Karbala is, to be able to understand the mazlumiyat of the person in this day and age. You won't be able to recognize the zalim of the day. Remember the words of Imam Hussein, mithli la yubayi' mithlu. Person like me does not do bayat of person like him. He did not mention his name or the name of Yazid. Yazid of the time, what Imam is referring to, that there will be a Yazid of every time. So when you hear the waqi'at of Mazlumeen, it should develop this sympathy in you, that you feel sympathy toward Mazlumeen, regardless of what culture, religion, background, color, or skin they come from. And similarly, animosity towards Zalimeen, regardless of, even if they were your own, have the courage to go ahead and stand up and denounce that Zalim, which might be your own family member. So this is what the lesson of Karbala is. And then Imam Hussein ﷺ was mentioning this all along. Innal haqqa la yu'malu bih. When you come to Majlis Aza, you get a distinguishment between haqq and batil. Haqq and batil that Imam Hussein was trying to teach at that time. Innal haqqa la yu'malu bih. Haqq was not being practiced. Wa innal batila la yatanaha anhu. My discussion, which I wanted to start from tonight, I recited this ayat for you from Surah Araf, ayat number 54. Inshallah, I won't start the discussion now, as I've taken too much of your time already, but just wanted to give you a flavor of what we are going to be discussing. I chose this ayat for various reasons. Let me just translate, because I didn't get a chance to translate the ayah. That the ayah begins by saying, Inna rabbakumul ladhi, that your Lord, your Allah, Inna rabbakumullahu alladhi khalaqas samawati wal ardh. Your Lord, your Rabb is someone who has created the heavens and the earth. Fi sittati ayyamin, in 6 days. Now the word yawm or ayyam is not the opposite of night. हम कहते हैं उर्दू में दिन और रात. Yawm is not opposite of layl. Opposite of layl is what? Nahar in Arabic. So yawm does not necessarily mean a day. Yawm could mean a phase. So it doesn't mean that Allah created it in 6 days. Allah does not need days. He can just say kun and it becomes. But rather it's referring towards 6 phases, as Mufassirin have mentioned. ثُمَّ اسْتَوَىٰ عَلَى الْعَرْشِ. Then Allah ascended on His arsh, or He established, or He, and the other translations are that He relaxed after having created, for example. That there is no relaxation for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and there's no resting of Him upon the arsh. This is just a figure of speech. يُغْشِ اللَّيْلَ النَّهَارِ. There's this night and day that comes. يَطْلُبُهُ جُسَاثًا. يُطْلُبُهُ حُسَاثًا, that they're going after one another. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created what? وَالشَّمْسَ وَالْقَمَرَ وَالنُّجُومَ مُسَخَّرَاتٍ بِأَمْرِهِ. All these things are, as far as the sun and the moon and the nujum are concerned, they're all, working with the amr and the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Lahul khalqu, ala lahul khalqu. Indeed, to Allah belongs khilqat, wal amru, and the command belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Tabarakallahu Rabbul Alameen. Glorify to Allah, the one who's the Lord of the universe. This is the ayat that I recited for you, and I put away my notes so that I won't give you more trouble for tonight. After having recited this ayah, remember the discussion that we want to have in these nights to come is in regards to the role of imams, naqsh a'imma dar ahyai deen, role of imams and ma'asumeen in the revival of religion. Religion which was tampered with. Madhab which was distorted. You look at from the time of Rasulullah after his wafat, it only takes 60 years. In fact, only takes 50 years for people to go ahead and desecrate Rasulullah's own grandson, killing him in the plains of Karbala. In fact, it only took a few days for them to desecrate the house of the daughter of Rasulullah. Right. So it did not take long for them to turn away from the teachings that Rasulullah had left. The deen which said, Al-Yawm akmaltu lakum dinakum, that reached that peak, now had gone to the tanazzul, where it was facing many challenges. And this is where Masumeen played a big role in reviving the teachings of the religion. You find in the times of each imam's time might be different from the others, but their workload was similar. They might have had only a few years to work with, just like your 9th imam. He only had a few years to work with. He was only 25 years old at the time of his shahadat. Some imams had a longer period in their possession to go ahead and work with, just like your 6th imam and your 5th imams, respectively. So different times, but different ways, but the message was the same. And therefore, I'll just give you one example tonight of the distortion of the deen and from where it began. And inshallah, I'll conclude, and inshallah, we'll get into the discussions more in depth from tomorrow. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala refers to the leaders of the Jews and the Christians in Quran as arbab. Arbab, plural for Rab. He calls them the Rahban, those who were Rahib of the Christian world. And the Jewish scholars call them to be Arbab. Why? Because they changed the kalam of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They intervened and they fabricated and they changed and altered what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had intended. So when Aday ibn Hatim al-Ta'i came to Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam, and he was wearing this golden chain with, the cross, Rasulullah told him to take it off. And then next time when he came, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Rasulullah recited this ayat, ittakhadhu. They took their leaders to be arbab. Aday said, "O Rasulullah, we do not worship them. Why are you calling them to be our Rabb?" He said, "But you take laws from them. You take legislation from them. That itself is enough." And inshallah, I'll get into the discussion of Rabb tomorrow. Example of that you find within our own madhab as well. Example from the second Khalifa in the time of Amirul Mu'mineen. This riwayat is there in the books such as Sahih al-Bukhari, that the second Khalifa said, "Mut'atan kana fi ahde Rasulillah," or fi zamane Rasulillah, "ana anha anhuma." Or there were two types of mut'ah that existed in the time of Rasulullah. I am forbidding them, wa waqibukuma. And if anyone performs them, I will go ahead and, give you punishment for that. كانت في زمن رسول الله حلال وأنا أحرمهما. And I am making them to be forbidden. So here we see that this sort of distortion had began. And this is one example of it. There are many examples that exist. This is where Masumeen had to step in, to go ahead and revive the teachings, and therefore their role in the revival of the religion. And you find that when Masumeen were questioned about it, there was no difference between what Rasulullah said to what Imam of our time, Imam Mahdi Ajjalallahu Ta'ala Farajahu Sharif, has said. Both, you find them to be aligned absolutely when it comes to their ta'limat. But Rasulullah never said, "I am legislating this, I am forbidding this." Although the ayat of Quran says, وَمَا أَتَاكُمُ الرَّسُولُ فَخُذُوا وَمَا نَهَاكُمْ عَنْهُ فَانْتَهُوا. Whatever Rasul gives you, take. Whatever he makes forbidden, refrain. But Rasulullah never really said anything that I'm making this wajib, which was haram before, and I'm making this haram, which was wajib before. He said, وَمَا عَلَيْنَا إِلَّا الْبَلَاغُ. Even I do not have the authority to go ahead and change the ahkam of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَمَا عَلَيْنَا إِلَّا الْبَلَاغُ. My duty is only to go ahead and convey the message from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Don't consider me like you, because you don't receive wahi. I receive wahi. You think that I'm like you? Do you receive wahi from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? No, then there's no similarity between me and you. So I'm different from that aspect. But even Rasulullah did not go ahead and change any ahkam. And you find that the similarity that continued up until Imam of our time. That's why we believe in this fact. And it's not just a maqula and a qawl. Awwaluna Muhammad, awsatuna Muhammad, wa akhiruna Muhammad, wa kulluna Muhammad. Salawat biji Muhammad wa ala کہ پہلے کا قول بھی وہی ہے، درمیانے کا قول بھی وہی ہے، آخر والے کا قول بھی وہی ہے، سب کا قول ایک ہی ہے. ان کے اقوال میں کوئی فرق اور تضاد نہیں پایا جائے گا. اسی لیے آپ کو کبھی یہ نظر نہیں آئے گا کہ چھٹے امام یہ کہتے ہوئے نظر آ رہے ہیں کہ میں یہ کہتا ہوں کہ اس کو یوں انجام دیا جائے. کسی روایت میں آپ کو ایسا نہیں ملے گا. ہمیشہ امام یہ کہیں گے میرے جد نے یہ فرمایا، ان کے جد نے یہ فرمایا. آپ کے سامنے ہے سلسلہ وہ حدیث سلسلۃ الذہب. 8ویں امام جب پہنچتے ہیں مرو، وہاں پہ ہزاروں لوگوں کا مجمع ہے کہ جو امام سے روایت نقل کرنا چاہتے ہیں. امام کیا کہتے ہیں؟ امام یہ نہیں کہتے انا اقول، میں یہ کہتا ہوں علی ابن موسیٰ، میرا یہ کہنا ہے، میرا یہ فرمان ہے، میرا یہ حکم ہے، میں یہ چیز صادر کر رہا ہوں. امام یہ کہتے ہیں کہ میں نے سنا اپنے والد گرامی سے، انہوں نے نقل کیا اپنے والد گرامی سے، انہوں نے نقل کیا اپنے والد سے، حتیٰ امام حسین تک روایت پہنچتی ہے. انہوں نے امیر المؤمنین سے نقل کیا، انہوں نے رسول اللہ سے نقل کیا، انہوں نے جبرائیل سے نقل کیا، جبرائیل نے اللہ سے یہ پیغام پہنچایا ہے کہ کلمۃ لا الہ الا اللہ حسنی، کہ کلمہ لا الہ الا اللہ ایک قلعہ کی مانند ہے، فورٹ کی مانند ہے. من دخل امن من عذابی، جو بھی اس قلعے کے اندر داخل ہو گیا وہ میرے عذاب سے امان پا گیا. لوگوں نے یہ حدیث لکھ لی امام کی. امام نے کہیں یہ نہیں کہا کہ میں یہ کہتا ہوں، میرا یہ قول ہے، میں یہ فرما رہا ہوں، یا میں نے یہ چیز لیجسلیٹ کی ہے. نہیں، امام صرف یہ کہتے گئے کہ میرے جد نے یہ کہا، ان کے جد نے یہ کہا، ان کے جد نے یہ کہا، حتیٰ یہاں تک کہ اللہ تک اس بات کو پہنچا دیا. شاید امام اسی بات کی طرف ہماری توجہات کو مبذول کرانا چاہتے تھے. ہم جو کہتے ہیں رسول کے لیے تو آیت آ گئی وما ينطق عن الهوى ان هو الا وحی یوحى، لیکن ہم بھی جو کہہ رہے ہیں وہ رسول کی ذات سے کہہ رہے ہیں، اور رسول تو کچھ کہتے ہی نہیں ہے سوائے جو کہ اللہ سبحانہ و تعالیٰ نے ان سے کہا ہوتا ہے. صلوات بھیجئے محمد و آل محمد. تو جب کہا کلمۃ لا الہ الا اللہ حسنی فمن دخل حسنی آمن من عذابی، لوگ سمجھے کہ روایت یہاں ختم ہو گئی، پردہ برابر ہو گیا، شاید سواری بھی آگے بڑھی. لیکن امام نے پھر دوبارہ پردہ ہٹایا. پھر امام نے ایک اور بڑا کلیدی جملہ اس وقت کہا کہ ہاں کلمہ لا الہ الا اللہ میرا قلعہ تو ہے، اللہ نے کہا، اور جو بھی میرے اس قلعے میں داخل ہو جائے گا وہ میرے عذاب سے بچ جائے گا. ہمارا مقصد اس دنیا میں کیا ہے؟ ایسی زندگی گزارنا کہ جس سے ہم عذاب اخروی سے بچ سکیں، تاکہ وہ اعمال انجام دیں کہ اس دنیا میں بھی سرخرو رہ سکیں، اس جہاں میں بھی سرخرو رہ سکیں. اس دن ہمیں عذاب نہ ہو، یہاں ہو جائے تو الگ بات ہے، وہاں پہ ہمیں کوئی عذاب نہ ملے. عذاب سے بچے رہیں، امان میں رہیں. اس کا کیا کلیدی جملہ امام نے کہا؟ امام نے کہا وَبِشُرُوطِهَا، ہاں اس کلمہ لا الہ کے ساتھ کچھ شرائط بھی منسلک ہیں. وَأَنَا مِن شُرُوطِهَا، اور ان میں سے ایک شرط میری ذات گرامی ہے. ہاں مجھ پہ بھی یقین رکھنا ہے، میری ولایت پہ بھی عمل کرنا ہے. اسی کے ذریعے تم اللہ کے اس قلعے میں داخل ہو سکتے ہو اور اس کے عذاب سے تم بچ سکتے ہو. صلوات دیجیے محمد و آل محمد. اور یہ کوئی نئی چیز نہیں تھی کہ جو امام رضا نے اس طریقے سے کہی ہو. رسول اللہ یہ چیز پہلے ہی فرما چکے تھے. جب رسول اللہ نے تشبیہ دی تھی کہ مثل اہل بیتی کمثل سفینۃ نوح، کہ میرے اہل بیت کی مثال نوح کے سفینے سے مترادف ہے. جو بھی اس میں سوار ہو گیا وہ نجات پا جائے گا۔ ومن تخلف عنہا ضل فغرق، اور جو بھی اس سے دوری اختیار کرے گا وہ ڈوب جائے گا اور وہ گمراہی کی راہ پہ چلا جائے گا۔ لہٰذا رسول اللہ پہلے ہی اہل بیت کی مثال سفینہ نوح سے دے چکے تھے، لیکن تحریفات کا سلسلہ اتنا چل رہا تھا کہ اسی کے مقابل میں آپ کو روایت مل جاتی ہے کہ اصحابی کن نجوم، میرا اصحاب نجوم کی مانند ہیں، ان میں سے جن کی بھی تم پیروی کرو گے تم ہدایت پا جاؤ گے۔ بس ہمیں سفینہ نوح کی ضرورت نہیں ہے، ہم اپنے اصحاب کی طرف جا سکتے ہیں، ان سے مدد لے سکتے ہیں یا ان کی پیروی کر سکتے ہیں۔ رسول اللہ نے ایک مقصد کے تحت سفینہ نوح کی مثال دی تھی۔ سفینہ کب بنا تھا؟ اس زمانے بھی لوگ اس جگہ پہ جہاں حضرت نوح سفینہ کی تعمیر کر رہے تھے، لوگوں نے مذاق اڑایا تھا، تمسخر کیا تھا کہ نوح تمہیں کیا ہو گیا ہے، تم یہاں پہ سفینہ بنا رہے ہو جہاں پانی کا کوئی نام و نشان نہیں ہے۔ لیکن اللہ کی طرف سے مامور تھے، پانی آیا، سیلاب آیا تو ایسا آیا حتیٰ نبی نوح کا فرزند بھی جو کہہ رہا تھا سآوی الی الجبل، میں تو پہاڑ پہ چڑھ جاؤں گا، مجھے جو ہے وہ نجات مل جائے گی، کہا لا عاصم، آج کسی چیز سے نجات نہیں ملنے والی ہے سوائے اس سے جس کے اوپر اللہ رحمت کر دے۔ تو وہ بھی ڈوب گیا، وہ بھی مغرقین میں سے تھا، قرآن کی آیت نے بیان کر دیا۔ تو حضرت نوح کے سفینے کی مثال دی اہل بیت سے مترادف کرتے ہوئے۔ پتہ چلا اصحابی کا نجوم، جن نجوم کی طرف آپ دیکھ رہے تھے وہ نجوم کب تک آپ کی رہنمائی کریں گے؟ اگر ویسے ہی سیلاب آیا، سیلاب آنے کے لیے بادل آنا ضروری ہیں، بادل آتے ہیں تو آسمان چھپ جاتا ہے، جب آسمان چھپ گیا تو وہ کون سے نجوم ہیں کہ جو آپ کو نظر آنے والے ہیں کہ آپ جن کی پیروی کریں اور آپ کو ہدایت مل جائے؟ لہٰذا اہل بیت ہی کا وہ راستہ ہے کہ جس کے ذریعے آپ کی ہدایت ہو سکتی ہے۔ صلوات بھیجیے محمد و آل محمد۔ بس عزیزوں، کل آپ کے سامنے امام حسین کے اس سفیر کا تذکرہ کیا تھا کہ جس نے آخری دم تک امام کے اس عمل کو، اس سفارت کے عمل کو انجام دیا جب تک کہ جام شہادت نوش نہ فرما لیا، اور اس طریقے سے حضرت مسلم ابن عقیل کو پھرایا گیا، ان کے جسد کو پھرایا گیا، دارالامارہ سے زمین پہ پھینکا گیا کہ جب یہ خبر امام حسین تک پہنچتی ہے، امام اب بہت آگے آ چکے ہیں۔ امام جو کہ مکے سے نکل کے اب آ رہے تھے کوفے کی جانب، امام بہت آگے آ چکے ہیں۔ اب یہ وقت نہیں ہے کہ امام پلٹ کے جا سکیں۔ امام منتظر تھے کہیں سے خبر آئے مسلم کے حوالے سے، لیکن ابھی تک مسلم کے حوالے سے صرف ایک ہی خبر آئی تھی کہ امام جتنی جلدی ہو سکتا ہے آئیے۔ امام آگے بڑھتے جاتے ہیں، وہ مقام آتا ہے جس کا نام ہے شراف۔ یہاں پہ امام کی ملاقات حر سے ہوتی ہے۔ امام اپنا مسیر تبدیل کرتے ہیں، کوفہ نہیں جاتے، خبر مل چکی ہے کہ اب کوفہ جانے کے قابل نہیں ہے، وہاں پہ خون کے پیاسے بیٹھے ہوئے ہیں۔ امام ایک تیسری جانب نکلتے ہیں، جہاں پہ جس ڈائریکشن میں امام چلتے ہیں، جس سمت میں امام چلتے ہیں، بس ایک وہ مقام آتا ہے کہ یہ 2 محرم کا دن ہے کہ جب اہل بیت، اہل حرم اس مقام پہ داخل ہوتے ہیں۔ وہ جگہ کون سی تھی؟ جب امام اس جگہ پہ پہنچے تو ایک دفعہ امام کی سواری نے آگے جانے سے انکار کر دیا۔ امام نے اسب باوفا سے کہا کہ آگے بڑھ، آگے نہیں بڑھا۔ امام نے کہتے ہیں روایات میں ایک کے بعد دوسرے کے بعد تیسرے 7 سواریاں تبدیل کی، مگر کوئی بھی سواری امام کو آگے لے جانے سے قاصر تھی۔ امام نے پوچھا اس جگہ کا نام کیا ہے؟ کسی نے کہا اس کا نام ہے شاطئ الفرات۔ امام نے کہا اس کا کوئی اور نام ہوگا، کسی نے کہا اس کا نام ہے نینوا۔ امام نے کہا کوئی اور نام بتاؤ، کسی نے کہا غادریہ۔ امام نے کہا شاید کوئی اور نام ہوگا، کسی اور سے پوچھو۔ ایک نے کہا اس کا نام ہے کربلا۔ امام سمجھ گئے ہاں ہونا یہی وہ جگہ ہے کہ جہاں ہمارے بچوں کو ذبح کیا جائے گا، یہی وہ جگہ ہے کہ جہاں ہمارا خون بہایا جائے گا، یہی وہ جگہ ہے کہ جہاں ہم کو شہید کیا جائے گا۔ امام علیہ الصلوۃ والسلام نے پہلے سے اس چیز کا اعتبار رکھا. امام نے اس جگہ کو خریدا, پیسے دے کے اس جگہ کو خریدا. پھر بنی اسد سے یہ گزارش کی کہ دیکھو جب ہمارے لاشوں کو یہاں پہ گرایا جائے گا نا تو کوئی ہم کو دفنانے والا نہ ہوگا, تم سے گزارش ہے کہ ہمارے لاشوں کو یہاں پہ دفنا دینا. بس وہ 10 محرم کا دن آتا ہے. وہ عجیب منزل تھی, جب مدینے سے چلے تھے تو حسین کس طریقے سے دیکھ رہے تھے, اب وہ 10 محرم آ جاتی ہے, امام حسین کی کیا کیفیت ہے. عجیب منزل ہے. جناب زینب دیکھتی ہیں, بیان کرتی ہیں, جب مدینے سے نکلے تھے ایک ایک خاتون کو جب سوار کیا جاتا تھا, کوئی جوان آگے بڑھتا تھا ان کو سوار کرتا تھا, لیکن جب ایک دفعہ راوی نے دور سے دیکھا, عبداللہ ابن سنان روایت کرتا ہے, میں نے دیکھا کہ جب کوئی خاتون سوار ہوتی تھی تو کوئی ایک جوان آگے بڑھتا تھا, لیکن ایک عجب منظر آیا, ایک خاتون جب سوار ہونے لگی تو حسین بھی اپنی جگہ سے کھڑے ہو گئے. میں نے پوچھا یہ کون خاتون ہے؟ کہا یہ شریکت الحسین, یہ زینب کبریٰ ہے. بس وہ زینب پہ منظر کیسے گزرا ہوگا جب 10 محرم آئی, جب سب کے سارے لاشیں گرا دیے گئے, اب کوئی دفنانے والا نہیں ہے. امام نے وصیت کی تھی کہ ہم کو دفنا دینا, ارے دفنانا تو دور کی بات ہے, سر سے تن کو جدا کیا گیا, گھوڑوں سے پامال کیا گیا, بس یہی کافی نہ تھا, اب سارے خواتین کو لے جانا ہے. لیکن وہ زینب کے ذہن میں منظر آیا ہوگا جب مدینے سے چلے تھے, کس شان سے نکلے تھے, کوئی سوار کرانے والا موجود تھا. ارے عباس, علی اکبر, ارے قاسم, کہاں گئے یہ لوگ؟ لیکن اب زینب ہر ایک کو سوار کراتی ہے, تمام بیویوں کو سوار کرایا, یہاں تک کہ وہ وقت آیا بیمار امام ہے, زینب بھتیجے کو اپنے ہاتھوں سے سوار کراتی ہے. الا لعنت اللہ القوم الظالمین وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون ان للہ و انا الیہ راجعون. بار الہ ہمارے اس بات قبول فرما, ہم گناہ گار ہیں, ہمارے گناہوں سے درگزر فرما, ہمیں اہل بیت علیہ الصلوۃ والسلام کے نقش قدم چلنے کی توفیق عطا فرما, ہمیں ان کی تعلیمات پر عمل کرنے کی توفیق عطا فرما, ہمارے امام کے ظہور میں تعجیل فرما, ہمیں ان کے اوان انصار میں شمار کر. ربنا تقبل منا انک انت السمیع العلیم. ایک دفعہ سورہ فاتحہ کی تلاوت کر کے ان مرحومین کی روح کو اصال کر دیں. بسم اللہ الرحمن الرحیم, الحمد للہ رب العالمین, ایاک نستعین اهدنا الصراط المستقیم صراط الذین انعمت علیہم غیر المغضوب علیہم ولا الضالین. ماتم حسین.